on my book, The True Story of the Bilderberg. Again, it's going to be out in theaters end of May, beginning of June. And when it's out, needless to say, I'll be more than happy and pleased to go back on your show and talk about it.
Incredible. Well, I'm thinking about going to Austria. I'll just give them a heads up like I did in England. They had British intelligence domestically there waiting for me when I got off the plane to have a little talk with me, and then I had to meet with the local multi-county group. But they ended up being pretty nice and helping us out, and ended up not liking the Bilderberg group too much. But I am going to give the Germans and the Austrians a heads up that I'm coming. I know it's two different countries, but the two work closely together. I wonder what reception I'll get in Austria. How do you expect them to treat the press, Daniel?
Not very well. It's, you know, if you're talking about jackboot, this is, you know, the epitome of jackboot. Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. I mean, you pretty much, you know, these are, if you want to talk about, you know, Soviet Gulag, this is the European, you know, German, Austrian, Swiss version of the Soviet Gulag, modified and needless to say.
Sure, well, you live over there, and you lived in Russia and Spain and everywhere else, and Canada, so I know you're internationally, you know, traveled, so I don't know. I haven't been to Austria yet. I know it's kind of a paradox, though, because the British ended up really hating Bilderberg and agreeing with me, the police, off record. And, I mean, a bunch of them. And you had police buying me beer and stuff when they would, you know, see me at the pub down the street getting dinner. So that was pretty amazing. And then when we had our reporters in Switzerland a few years ago, at first the police were real mean, but later they were escorting members of the local canton into the meeting, getting in the face of Bilderberg, and they panicked and had jet copters taking off at night, which I know you know about. So what do you make of kind of this awakening, even by local government, to Bilderberg?
Well, you know, I can tell you that in 2011, Mario Borghesio was European parliamentarian. He was actually punched out by the Swiss police, and he spent a couple of nights in the hospital.
That's right, he's suing him.
Yeah, this is a member of the European Parliament, and you know, I had to explain to Mario Borghesio. I said, Mario, Switzerland is not Europe. Switzerland is Switzerland. It's like another planet. It has nothing to do with Europe. So him coming in with his European member of the European Parliament pass makes absolutely no difference, because literally like walking into a, you know, closed-up gulag. And Austria, I fear, is going to be pretty much the same thing. It's a small country, it's a peep-squeak nation, and needless to say, you know, they have unresolved childhood issues, which they haven't been able to deal with since the Hitlerite days.
Are you going to be there?
I'm certainly going to try. You know, it all depends on the documentary. If it comes out, I may not be able to, maybe promoting the film, but if I'm not, I'm certainly going to be there. If you're interested, after the interview, I'm going to send you the documents I received from my sources. You're more than welcome to post them on your site, from the Ministry of the Interior of Austrian Secret Service, explaining about the Bilderberg community to the people in the ministry, so that they're aware which days they can and cannot take off, you know, leaves of absence.
Incredible. Well, I can't wait to see your film. It just looks like a smash hit. And, you know, Snowden's new film, Citizen 4, won an Oscar for Best Documentary. That's why they're so scared and said, how dare you? They know that you're really trying to make, you know, full-budget, professional, powerful film. And I just can't wait to see you in the last 4 years working on this to get this out, DanielEstulin.com. In closing, I know you've got sources. I know a lot of it now is pretty much, as you said last time you were on, is put out at Davos. But what's on the agenda for 2015 in Switzerland or in Austria?
One of the key issues, Alex, is fiscal austerity. You know, this boogeyman term is back. It's kind of a vague term that is, you know, actually refers to cutting social spending and increasing taxes. And the effect this has is that the public sector is devastated as all assets are privatized, public workers, you know, are fired en masse, unemployment becomes rampant, health and education disappear, taxes rise dramatically, and currencies are devalued to make all assets cheaper for international corporations and banks to buy up, while internally causing inflation, dramatically increasing the costs of fuel and food. And in short, fiscal austerity implies social destruction, as we're seeing right now in Greece, as we saw in Spain, as we saw in Portugal, and as we're seeing, you know, in Italy. And, you know, the social destruction of the social foundations of nations and peoples are pulled out from under them. States then become despotic and oppress the people who naturally revolt against austerity. And this is called the sterilization of society. And this is the term, again, this is the term, Alex, you're going to be seeing a lot more, with the build-up to Bilderberg and then post-Bilderberg. We talked about this before, terms like deindustrialization, zero growth, demand destruction. They were discussed at these private secret meetings, and then suddenly they were front and center in major newspapers. Next big front and center newspaper piece is sterilization of society. It sounds awful, just the word sterilization itself with all the connotations. When you start sterilizing society, it takes on a meaning of its own. It takes it, to an nth degree, of evil that, needless to say, we have to make sure we fight this.
When they say sterilization, do they mean sterilization physically, which we know is part of their agenda, population reduction, or does it mean kill upward mobility, stagnate, make people poor, and basically create a class society in the name of collectivism?
It's more, meaning austerity. So as austerity hits, for example, the West, the middle class will vanish in obscurity as they will be absorbed into the lower labor-oriented working class. The youth of the Western middle class, comprising the majority of the educated youth, will be exposed to a poverty of expectations in which they grew up in a world in which they were promised everything, in which these kids played by the rules, and which, they got nothing from society. And the inevitability... I
tell you what, Daniel, I don't want to cut you off. I know you got to go, but do 5 more minutes with us if you can. I'm going to twist your arm. DanielEstulin.com. I want you to finish up. So thank you so much on what their agenda is straight ahead. And then we'll cover world news and economic news after he leaves us. More with Daniel Estulin straight ahead. I'm Alex Jones. Greece's economic meltdown and bailout. What's the real story? Could Europe be the new Japan? Putin, Russia, and Ukraine war. Results of Davos summit. We kind of hit on that. 70th anniversary of Yalta conference. Daniel was invited to give a keynote speech for the Russian government. That's a big deal. That was when Stalin, Churchill, and of course the U.S. president at the time, he died shortly after, Roosevelt, all met. And the post-world plan was set up. Copenhagen terrorist attack, and we already talked about trans-evolution, transhumanism, but he joins us right now from Europe. Daniel, continuing, let's run through what's in store in the agenda and then these points.
Maybe it was just, as we have very little time, maybe just touch on a couple of things. One is Russia, Ukraine, and the other is the situation with the ECs, because it all kind of ties in with what's happening in with deindustrialization, et cetera. I think it's, it's fairly obvious when we're talking about, the whole issue between Russia and the United States and NATO. It's not Ukraine. It's the determination of governments that are under the thumb of the London Wall Street financial oligarchy to crush any sovereign opposition to their power. And the powerful nations committed to defending national sovereignty, especially Russia and China, are thus de facto their enemies, and any lies necessarily to justify that the designation will be and are being used. And the truth is being overwhelmed by a torrent of lies about Russian aggression, suppressing the real story of the coup d'etat in Ukraine, the Nazi nature of the coup plotters themselves, and also the strategic intentions behind the plot. And we're seeing that, and it's amazing how easily the Americans can be confused and lied to and accept, the propaganda of the White House and the Western elite.
That's right. Copenhagen terrorist attack. What do you think is going on there?
Well, if you kind of go back, Alex, to, I don't know if you remember back in 2005, the famous politicking cartoons. These are the first, Mohammed cartoons, which were released in 2005 by this Danish newspaper called JT Politiken. So one of the guys of free speech, this newspaper, they published a dozen provocative anti-Islamic cartoons clearly designed to offend the Muslims. We've seen this again with Charlie Hebdo. We're seeing it right now, what's going on in Denmark. But if you kind of look at what's going on, all these characters, whether it's Sarkozy's, Cheney's, Rumsfeld, Netanyahu's, Jack Straw's, Obama's, Bush's, all of these people that march into the martial music of the neocons, that the shock troops of the Clash of Civilizations, Project for New American Century, the Long War, Clean Break, and all these other neocon plots, conspiracies, and contrivances. And once again, the question is, who benefits? Enters the equation. Muslims, they may burn off some of the outrage of what they see as denigration, of the religion. But at the end of the day, the Straussian, Jabotinsky liquidite coalition They score some very big propaganda points, and once again, people in America and Europe who must be periodically reminded of the necessity for this clash of civilizations agenda for total war, are incensed by the violence spreading across the Middle East, and are convinced that all Muslims are crazed fanatics who must ultimately be dealt with and put to death. And so when you kind of look at it from that perspective, you ask yourself, who wins? Well, this is the situation. And again, going back, putting all these things, from a bird's eye view into perspective, ISIS, Ukraine, deindustrialization in America, what's going on? Well, we all know what ISIS is. But, with its fingertip control of the world's oil supplies, ISIS is holding the economies and hence the governments of Western Europe and Japan hostage to the same policy. And with its networks of mullahs and kooks distributed throughout the Middle East, it is threatening the Arab world with the hell of more Iran, if Arab governments do not play along with the Islamic card and seize their aspirations for industrial development. But again, these people are not new. ISIS, we saw this with the Muslim Brothers going back 7 years. It's the same thing as Al-Qaeda. This is a very old strategy. For at least 150 years, Alex, it has been the strategy of the British and later the Anglo-Americans to make use of the religious and tribal backwardness of the nations of the near Middle East and Central Asia in order to control the people of the area and to maintain them in a state of underdevelopment. It has recently become obvious that we've seen years back in the 1990s with Zbigniew Brzezinski's book. It has been sold on the idea that the Muslim fundamentalists, if properly guided, can be useful toy, for the Anglo-American strategy as a bulwark against anything that has to do with progress and development.
And what's amazing about listening to you, Daniel Estulin, is that you're quoting here from Brzezinski's book. You're quoting from the Grand Chessboard. You're quoting from the Great Game that the British talked about in India, where they would play different Indian tribes off against each other. How could you have one British, on average, conquer over 2,000 Indians with just a few thousand? It was using sociology to play different groups off. And so the globalists fund the radical Muslims, turn them loose. So it is a real issue. It is disgusting what they're doing. But then they open the borders, bring them in, let them attack, then take our liberties, and then go and take over and kill the innocent Muslims en masse. This is the globalist manipulating all sides against each other, and then writing books about their grand strategy. And the public needs to wake up to this and needs to understand it. Daniel, folks can follow you on Twitter. What's the best Twitter account for them to follow you at?
It's at Estulin Daniel. Also, as I said, the documentary is just about to be done. And I don't know if I mentioned, I don't think I did, but I was recently nominated for Nobel Peace Prize for all the work I have done over the years in fighting this globalist elite. So again, I think there's a lot of recognition being done and made on the world stage, not only for the things that I do, but also for this, again, for this change of consciousness in society, which is going towards this greater collective good, which is actually what we need, to actually defeat these people, defeat the elitists, and have a better future for our children.
Well said. God bless you. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you, Alex, so much for being on your show.
Absolutely. Again, Daniel's books have sold #1 bestseller in more than 15 countries, and a lot of Americans wouldn't know who he is. A lot of folks in Europe and Asia know who he is. It just shows how many great people there are out there fighting tyranny. And he's taken action. He's got a film coming out. That makes me feel good knowing there's more people out there fighting, not just myself or our listeners.